Today's story is titled, Mom Smiled. This is your last meal in this house. I slid one paper across the table. The entire family was gathered around my mother's dining table when she lifted her glass, looked straight at me, and smiled as if she had been waiting years to say the words. This is your last meal in this house. No one defended me. Some looked down at their plates. Others watched with the quiet excitement people have when humiliation is happening to someone else. My mother had already decided that her new partner would move in, that I would need permission to visit, and that the home built by my grandfather no longer had a place for me. She believed I would swallow the insult the way I had swallowed every sacrifice, every lie, and every moment she made me feel like a guest in my own family. What she did not know was that I had spent months uncovering a secret buried in county records, probate files, and one document signed before my grandfather died. I reached into my bag and placed that paper in the center of the table. Yours too, I said. Her smile vanished. She read it once, then again, before screaming, "You cannot do this." But the deed said otherwise. Stay until the end, because what began as a public betrayal will turn into a courtroom battle, a hidden sacrifice from my past, and one final piece of evidence that proves my mother knew the truth all along. And when the last door closes, the revenge will be quieter, colder, and far more satisfying than anyone at that table could have imagined. My name is Simone Archer. I am 37 years old, and I work as a senior paralegal at Morrison & Webb, a law firm in Greensboro, North Carolina, where I have spent nearly a decade tracing property records, verifying deeds, and finding the small details that determine who truly owns what. I live alone in a modest apartment, drive a 12-year-old Subaru, and have built a quiet life around facts because facts, unlike people, do not change their story when the truth becomes inconvenient. Long before I placed that document on my mother's dining table, I found it by accident on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon in September. I was working on a title search for a client named Harrington, reviewing a property near Summit Avenue. It was the kind of routine assignment I had completed hundreds of times. I entered the address, opened the county database, and began following the chain of ownership backward through old deeds and recorded transfers. Somewhere between one search and the next, my cursor slipped. Instead of reopening Summit Avenue, I clicked Birchwood Drive. I almost backed out immediately. Then I saw the address that had shaped nearly every important memory of my life. 1147 Birchwood Drive. It was the house my grandfather Earl had built in 1971, before the neighborhood had proper sidewalks and before anyone called that stretch of road Birchwood. It was where I had spent childhood summers, where my mother still hosted Sunday dinners, and where I continued to show up whenever she called, even though I had not lived there in years. I opened the property record without thinking. The page loaded slowly, and when the owner's name appeared, I stared at it as if the letters belonged to someone else. Owner of record, Simone Marie Archer. For several seconds, I did not move. I checked the parcel number, then the legal description, then the address again. Everything matched. The transfer date was the 14th of October, 2004. The grantor was Earl Thomas Archer, my grandfather. I clicked the scanned deed, and an old, yellowed document filled my screen. At the bottom of the second page was Earl's signature, large and deliberate, exactly as I remembered it from birthday cards and the notes he used to leave beside the telephone. Beneath it was a notary seal and the county recording stamp. The deed had been filed 1 week before he died. I leaned back in my chair and tried to make sense of what I was seeing. My mother had always said Earl left everything to the family. That was the phrase she used after his funeral, when I was still grieving and too young to ask what the family actually meant. I had believed the house became hers because she stayed in it. I had never questioned it. Why would I? She called it her house, paid the property taxes, chose the paint, rearranged the furniture, and reminded everyone that she had kept the place together after Earl was gone. Yet the public record said something completely different. I opened the chain of title and followed every entry back to 1971. Earl had been the original owner. There were no later transfers to my mother, no quitclaim deed, no refinance in her name, no correction document, nothing that moved ownership away from me. For 20 years, the house had remained legally mine. My first reaction was not anger. It was disbelief so complete that it felt almost peaceful. I checked the record again, then searched through a second database in case the first one was outdated. The result was the same. I downloaded the deed, the indexing sheet, and the ownership history into a new folder on my desktop. I named it Birchwood. Then I sat there, with my hands resting beside the keyboard, listening to the office around me continue as if nothing had changed. Phones rang. A copier started. Someone laughed near the reception desk. I could not understand how the world could remain so ordinary when one line in a county database had just rearranged my entire past. I thought about every Sunday dinner I had attended in that house. Every time my mother told me to call before coming. Every repair bill I had helped cover because she said maintaining the family home was everyone's responsibility. Every moment I had stood in the kitchen waiting for instructions while she moved through the rooms with the confidence of an owner. I needed another person to see what I was seeing, so I walked to Wanda Briggs's desk. Wanda had worked beside me for 6 years and possessed the rare ability to look directly at a disaster without pretending it was anything else. I turned my monitor toward her without speaking. She read the property record, opened the deed, and read it again. Then she slowly removed her glasses. "Simone," she said, "your mother has been living in your house for 20 years. Hearing the words aloud made the discovery real in a way the document had not. I looked back at Earl's signature and felt the first edge of a question that would not leave me alone. The house belonged to me. The records were clear. What I did not yet know was whether my mother had misunderstood the truth or had spent 2 decades carefully keeping it from me. That question followed me back to my desk and stayed there long after Wanda returned to her work. I knew enough about property law to understand that one recorded deed did not answer every question. Ownership could be affected by probate orders, guardianship arrangements, later filings, clerical corrections, or documents recorded under a different name. If I was going to confront my mother, I needed more than a shocking discovery. I needed a complete file. I began with Earl's probate record. His will had been filed within weeks of his death, and it confirmed that he intended Birchwood Drive to remain with me. The house had already been transferred through the deed, so the will did not give it to me a second time. Instead, it included a short clause stating that the property was to be preserved for Simone Marie Archer and managed according to the court's instructions until I reached adulthood. That wording led me to the guardianship file. Because I had been 17 when Earl died, my mother had petitioned the probate court for temporary authority to manage the property on my behalf. The order allowed her to pay taxes, arrange necessary repairs, maintain insurance, and protect the house from damage. It did not give her ownership. It did not allow her to sell the property, add another person to the title, or borrow against it for her own benefit. Most importantly, the order ended once I reached the age specified by the court. No extension had ever been filed. No later order gave her continued authority. From that point forward, she had remained in the house because no one had challenged her presence, not because the law had made it hers. I read the documents slowly, making notes in the margins as though I were preparing a file for one of the attorneys upstairs. I created a timeline, listed every relevant recording number, and printed copies of the deed, the will clause, the guardianship order, and the current tax record. What disturbed me most was not that my mother had stayed in the house. Earl had clearly expected her to live there while I was young, and I would never have thrown her out simply because I became an adult. What disturbed me was that she had never told me I had a choice. She had never said, "Simone, this house belongs to you now." She had allowed me to pay for repairs, contribute to taxes, and treat every visit as a favor she was granting me, while the law had placed the authority in my hands years earlier. Wanda came back near the end of the day and found me surrounded by printed pages. "Please tell me you called a lawyer," she said. "Not yet." "Why not?" "Because I want to know exactly what happened before I accuse her of anything." Wanda pulled out the chair beside my desk and sat down. "You already know what happened to the house." "I know what the records say. I do not know what she understood." Wanda studied me for a moment. That distinction matters to you more than it is going to matter to the courthouse. She was right, but I was not ready to admit why. The next morning, I contacted Peg Morrison, a real estate attorney whose work I had respected for years. Peg had a reputation for being careful, direct, and almost impossible to surprise. Her office was on Elm Street, 4 floors above a bakery that made the entire lobby smell like butter before noon. I brought her a binder with tabs, a 1-page chronology, and copies of every document I had found. She read in silence, occasionally making a small mark on her legal pad. When she finished, she removed her glasses and looked at me. "You own the property," she said. "The deed is valid, the chain of title is clean, and your mother has no recorded ownership interest." I asked whether the old guardianship order could give her some continuing claim. Peg shook her head. "It gave her management authority while you were underage. That authority ended. It did not convert into ownership because she continued living there." She explained that my mother's long occupancy did not automatically erase my deed. At most, Gloria was living there with permission and without a written lease. If I wanted her to leave, I would still need to terminate that permission formally and follow the proper legal process. I could not change the locks, remove her belongings, or treat the house as though no one occupied it. I told Peg I had no intention of doing any of those things. "I am not trying to punish her," I said. "I need to stop her from doing something with the property before she knows I found out." Peg's expression sharpened. "What do you think she is planning?" I told her about Randall Pruitt, the man my mother had been seeing for 8 months. She had mentioned that he was helping with repairs, spending more nights at the house, and talking about making certain changes once he was settled. I had not paid much attention before. Now every casual comment felt different. Peg turned back to her legal pad. "If she tries to add him to the deed, refinance, or enter into any agreement involving the title, she has no authority to do it. But if you believe she may try, we should put her on written notice immediately." She proposed preparing a cease and desist letter that would identify the property, state my ownership, and warn that any attempt to convey or encumber the house without my consent would be challenged. Peg made it clear that the letter itself would not be a court order. Its purpose was to remove any claim that my mother had acted innocently or without knowledge. Once she received it, every lender, closing attorney, or third party she contacted could also be informed of the dispute. "Do you want to speak to her privately before I send anything?" Peg asked. I looked down at Earl's signature through the clear plastic sleeve. Part of me still wanted to believe my mother would tell me the truth without being forced. "Give me a little time," I said. "I want to see whether she says anything on her own." Peg nodded, but before I left, she gave me one final warning. "Hope is not a legal strategy, Simone. If she is already making plans, waiting may be the one advantage you give her." I carried the binder back to my car and sat behind the wheel, understanding that I now knew exactly what I owned, but still had no idea how much my mother was willing to risk to keep pretending it belonged to her. Peg's warning stayed with me because it was practical, and practical things are harder to dismiss than fear. I knew waiting could cost me something, but I also knew I was not ready to walk into my mother's kitchen holding a legal truth that would divide our lives into before and after. For 3 months, I told myself I was being careful. I reviewed the file again, checked the court order, and made certain there was no document I had missed. But beneath all that careful work was a simpler truth. I was waiting for my mother to surprise me. I kept imagining that she would call one Sunday and say there was something she should have told me about Earl's will, something she had delayed because I was young, grieving, or not ready. I wanted her to confess without being cornered, because that would mean some part of our relationship had been built on hesitation instead of deception. Every week that passed made that hope less reasonable, but I held on to it anyway. During that time, I found myself thinking often about Earl's basement. It was the only room in the house that had ever felt completely honest. His workbench stood against the far wall, thick oak scarred by decades of use. Above it, every tool had its own hook and outline. Nothing was hidden. Nothing pretended to be something else. When I was 10, Earl let me use a small hand plane on a piece of pine. I pushed too hard. slipped off the edge, and expected him to take the tool away. Instead, he adjusted my hands and moved my feet. "Steady," he said. "Do not fight the wood. Listen to it." The second shaving came away clean. He studied my hands, then nodded. "You have steady hands, girl. Like me." At the time, I thought he was talking about woodworking. Years later, I understood that Earl measured people by what they did when something required patience. He trusted care more than confidence, and consistency more than charm. The longer I sat with the deed, the more I believed he had chosen me for that reason. That realization should have made me feel stronger. Instead, it forced me to look at all the ways I had spent my adult life acting as though trust had to be earned again every week. My mother called, and I came. She needed help moving furniture, and I drove across town. A repair bill arrived, and I transferred money before asking whether she had other options. At Sunday dinners, I carried dishes, refilled glasses, and stayed in the background while Gloria explained family decisions after making them without me. I had mistaken usefulness for belonging because usefulness gave me a role I knew how to perform. There was an old box of photographs under my bed that I had avoided opening for years. One evening, after another silent Sunday passed without Gloria mentioning Earl, I pulled it out. Near the bottom was a picture of me at 16 wearing a blue church dress on a weekday. I was holding a large envelope against my chest and smiling in a way that startled me. It was not a polite smile, or the careful one I used around my mother. It was open, almost fearless. I turned the photograph over. Nothing was written on the back. I knew what the envelope contained, but I put the picture aside before the memory could fully return. There are choices people survive by naming them sacrifices. That word gives pain a purpose and keeps you from asking whether the person who benefited ever understood the cost. I was not ready to ask that question yet. Still, pieces of the memory followed me. My mother's hands resting on a letter. Her voice saying, "It has always been just the two of us." The feeling of standing at the edge of a future and believing that stepping toward it would leave someone behind. I placed the photograph in the Birchwood folder, though it had nothing to do with the title. Maybe I already understood that the house was not the whole case. Around that time, Gloria began talking more often about Randall. She described him as dependable, practical, and good with his hands. He worked in contracting and had opinions about roofing, fences, and foundations. She told me he hated dishonesty because his former business partner had once hidden debts from him. "Randall can forgive almost anything," she said, "but not being made a fool of." I remember that sentence because of the certainty in her voice. She sounded proud of his principles. She did not seem to notice the danger in them. I had met Randall only twice. He was quiet and observant, the kind of man who looked at hinges while other people looked at paint. He treated me respectfully, though with the distance of someone who had received only one version of a family history. My mother had already begun saying "we" when she talked about changes to the house. We might open the wall between the kitchen and dining room. We needed to replace the back steps. We were thinking about converting the spare room. Each time, I waited for her to explain what authority she believed she had. She never did. Peg called once to ask whether I wanted the notice prepared. I told her yes, but asked her not to send it yet. I wanted it ready in case I needed it. That was the compromise I made with myself. I would stop pretending nothing was wrong, but I would allow my mother one final chance to tell the truth before a lawyer told it for her. The chance came on a Thursday evening when Gloria called and said she was planning a special Sunday dinner. Her voice carried the bright, controlled excitement she used when she had already arranged the outcome and was only inviting others to witness it. "Everyone will be there," she said, "and Randall has something important to celebrate." I asked what the announcement was. She laughed softly. "Come to dinner and you will find out." After we hung up, I called Peg and asked her to finish the letter. Then, I placed the old photograph of myself at 16 back in the box, not knowing that before this was over, I would finally have to remember what had been inside that envelope. By Sunday afternoon, Peg's letter was sealed inside a manila envelope in my bag, and I had still not decided whether I would use it. I drove toward Birchwood Drive, telling myself I was only going to listen. If my mother's announcement had nothing to do with the house, I would keep the envelope hidden and speak to her privately later. That was the promise I made to myself at every traffic light, even though I no longer believed it. When I turned onto Birchwood Drive, I slowed before reaching the house. For the first time in my life, I looked at it as something I was responsible for, rather than somewhere I had been allowed to return. The north side of the roof showed dark patches where the shingles were beginning to age. One corner of the east gutter had pulled slightly away from the fascia. The porch Earl built was still level, its boards holding firm beneath decades of rain and heat. The oak tree he planted in the front yard had grown taller than the roof and spread its branches across half the property. Nothing about the house looked different, yet everything had changed because I was finally seeing it clearly. Randall was beside the fence with a pry bar when I got out of my car. He had removed a damaged board and was fitting a new one into place. He wore faded work clothes and moved with the quiet certainty of someone who understood materials. "Good wood underneath," he said when he noticed me watching. "Earl built things to last." "He did," I replied. Randall nodded toward the foundation. "Same with the house. Whoever poured that base knew what he was doing." There was no arrogance in his voice, no sign that he believed he had already inherited anything. That made what was coming harder, not easier. Inside, the house was warm with the smell of smoked ribs, baked macaroni, and collard greens. My mother had been cooking since Friday. The cream tablecloth was spread across the dining table, both extra leaves had been added, and the good serving dishes were arranged as carefully as church flowers. 14 people arrived by 5 o'clock, including my aunts, several cousins, 2 women from Gloria's Bible study group, and a neighbor from down the street. Randall had changed into a clean button-down shirt and sat near the far end of the table. I took my usual place between Aunt Celeste and my cousin Marcus. My bag rested against my ankle, close enough that I could feel the edge of the envelope through the leather. Before dinner, Gloria took Randall from room to room, while the rest of us carried food and filled glasses. I heard her from the kitchen. "This is the dining room. I had these floors refinished. The back bedroom gets the best morning light. I replaced those windows 3 years ago." She spoke with the pride of a person presenting a life she had built alone. She did not mention that I had paid part of the flooring bill or that the window contractor had called me when the deposit was due. I did not correct her. Not yet. As I carried a pitcher of sweet tea toward the table, I saw Gloria step into the hallway with her phone. Her voice dropped, but the house was never large enough for secrets. "Yes," she said. "Randall is going to move in. I am going to make it official and put his name on the deed. What is mine should be his." I stopped just beyond the doorway. The words were calm and settled, as though the decision had already been executed. For one moment, I felt the old instinct rise in me, the urge to wait, to avoid embarrassment, to give her another chance in private. Then I remembered Peg's warning. Waiting was no longer neutral. Waiting could allow my mother to involve lenders, attorneys, or documents she had no right to touch. I stepped into the bathroom, locked the door, and sent Peg a short message. "She is announcing it tonight. I may have to serve the letter myself." Peg answered almost immediately. "Keep the conversation factual. Do not threaten. Do not take possession by force. Give her the documents and leave if the situation escalates." I put my phone away and returned to the dining room. The meal lasted nearly an hour. Gloria moved through it with restrained excitement, glancing toward Randall whenever someone praised the food or asked about his contracting work. He answered politely, but he seemed more reserved than she did. At one point, Aunt Celeste asked whether he planned to stay in Greensboro permanently. Gloria answered before he could. "He is not going anywhere," she said, smiling. Randall looked down at his plate. When most of the dishes had been cleared, Gloria tapped her fork against her water glass. The conversations faded. She stood beside her chair, one hand resting on the table. "This house has always been about family," she began. "It is about who shows up, who stays, and who builds a life together." She turned toward Randall and announced that he would be moving into Birchwood Drive. Then she said she intended to add his name to the deed, so the house would become his home in Aunt Celeste pressed a hand to her chest. Someone from the Bible study group said it was wonderful news. I remained still. Gloria let the approval settle around her before looking directly at me. Simone, she said, her smile becoming smaller and sharper, you have never really contributed to this household in the way Randall has. Once he moves in, you cannot keep appearing here whenever it suits you. You will need to call first and ask. I suppose this is your last meal in this house, the way things have been. The room did not react at once. Some faces turned toward me, others lowered toward their plates. Gloria looked satisfied, as if she had established a boundary that everyone would admire. Beneath the table, my hand closed around the strap of my bag. For years, I had believed keeping the peace made me kind. In that moment, I understood it had only taught my mother that she could define my place without resistance. I reached down, opened the bag, and touched the envelope. My fingers stayed on the envelope for 1 second longer than they needed to. That second contained every version of me that had ever chosen silence, because silence seemed kinder than conflict. Then I pulled the envelope from my bag and placed it in the center of the table, between the water pitcher and the bread basket, where no one could pretend not to see it. The room was still carrying the last traces of my mother's announcement when I said, "That is from my attorney." Gloria's smile remained in place, but something behind it shifted. She picked up the envelope slowly, glanced at my name on the front, and looked at me as though I had broken some private rule by bringing the outside world into her dining room. "What attorney?" she asked. "Read it." She tore open the flap and removed the letter, followed by the attached copy of the deed. The first page carried Peg Morrison's letterhead, the address of Birchwood Drive, and language precise enough to make emotion irrelevant. My mother read the opening paragraph. Her eyes moved back to the top and began again. No one spoke. Even Marcus, who normally filled every silence, stayed quiet. Gloria reached the second page, then unfolded the deed copy and studied Earl's signature. She read the recording date, the legal description, and the line naming me as grantee. The color left her face so gradually that I almost missed it. "What is this?" she said. It was not confusion. It was resistance wearing confusion's clothes. "A cease and desist notice," I said. "And a certified copy of the deed Earl recorded before he died. The house has been in my name since I was 17. Aunt Celeste leaned forward. "Simone, what are you saying?" "I am saying Mom does not own this property. She never did." Marcus pushed his chair back slightly. "That cannot be right. Everybody knows this is Aunt Gloria's house." "Everybody has heard her call it that," I replied. "That is not the same thing." Gloria looked around the table, searching for the room she had controlled only moments earlier. "This is ridiculous," she said. "I have lived here for decades. I paid bills. I maintained this place. I raised you here. None of that changes the deed." She slapped the paper against the table. "A piece of paper does not erase a lifetime. It does not erase anything. It establishes ownership." I kept my voice level because Peg had told me facts mattered most when everyone else became emotional. "The court gave you temporary authority to manage the property while I was underage. That authority ended years ago. You have no right to add Randall to the title, refinance the house, or enter into an agreement involving it." Gloria's expression hardened. "You came here planning this." "I came prepared because I heard you say you intended to put his name on my property." The word "my" landed harder than I expected. Across the table, Randall held out his hand. "Let me see it." Gloria did not move. He waited. After a moment, I slid the deed toward him. He read it without rushing. His eyes followed every line from the property description to the signatures. When he reached Earl's name, he paused. Then he looked at the recording stamp and turned back to the first page. The room watched him because he was the only person there who seemed capable of treating the document as something other than an insult. Finally, he set it down. "You told me you owned this house," he said to Gloria. His voice was quiet, which made the words sharper. "I do own it in every way that matters," she answered. "That is not what I asked." Gloria opened her mouth, but no answer came. Randall looked at me. Did you know about this before tonight? For a few months. And she never told you? No. He nodded once, as though completing a calculation he did not like. Then he stood, took his jacket from the back of his chair, and turned to Gloria. You knew I would never agree to this if I thought the property belonged to your daughter. Randall, sit down. You put me in the middle of something without telling me the truth. He faced me again. I am sorry. Then he walked out. The front door closed with a soft click, and the silence afterward felt larger than the house. Gloria stared at the empty chair, then turned on me with the expression she used whenever she needed someone else to become responsible for her choices. You did this to humiliate me. No, you announced your plan in front of everyone. I answered in front of the same people. Earl would never want this. He loved this family. Earl signed the deed. The neighbor from church, a woman who had barely spoken all evening, looked at Gloria and asked, "Whose name is actually on it?" My mother did not answer. I stood and placed the letter back on the table. Peg's office will send formal notice about the next steps. I am not asking you to leave tonight. I am not changing the locks or touching your belongings, but you will not make decisions about this property anymore. Gloria's voice rose. You cannot do this to me. I looked at her, at the woman who had just told me I needed permission to enter my own home, and said, You told me this was my last meal here. Yours too, Mom, as the person who decides who belongs. I picked up my bag, left the deed in front of her, and walked toward the door Earl had hung with his own hands. Behind me, no one tried to stop me. I stepped outside, believing the truth had finally ended the argument. 3 days later, Peg called to tell me my mother had filed a lawsuit. Peg did not waste time softening the news. Your mother filed a civil action challenging the deed, she said. She is asking the court to recognize an alleged oral agreement with Earl and quiet title in her favor. I stood at my kitchen counter with one hand wrapped around a cup of coffee I had forgotten to drink. Does she have anything to support it? Nothing attached to the complaint. No letter, no witness statement, no recorded agreement. She is claiming Earl promised the house would become hers after his death. I looked through the window at the apartment parking lot, where a man was walking a small brown dog along the same strip of grass they used every morning. The ordinary sight made the lawsuit feel even more unreal. Can she do that? She can file, Peg said. That does not mean she can win. We will answer the complaint and ask for dismissal. If she continues after being shown the deed and still has no reasonable evidence, we can seek sanctions. I told her to proceed. The words came out more steadily than I felt. Gloria had taken a private truth and moved it into a courtroom where every claim would have to be signed, dated, and defended. For the next several days, my phone rang almost constantly. My mother called. My aunts called. Marcus left 2 messages, one angry and one strangely formal, as though he had been appointed family spokesperson. I ignored most of them, but I listened to Aunt Celeste's voicemail before work one morning. She said she was worried about Gloria. She said the lawsuit was tearing everyone apart. Then she said she was praying for both of us. What she did not say was that my mother should stop trying to take property that was not hers. The omission hurt more than an accusation would have. It reminded me that peace in my family had always meant I was expected to absorb the damage quietly. Peg filed our response, along with copies of the recorded deed and the expired guardianship order. She also sent Gloria's attorney a letter asking for any evidence of the supposed agreement with Earl. None arrived. Instead, Gloria submitted a sworn statement, saying Earl had repeatedly assured her that the house would be hers because she had remained there and cared for it. Reading those words made something inside me settle. She was no longer reacting in shock. She was choosing a version of events and placing it under oath. On Friday evening, Wanda appeared at my apartment, carrying food from the Haitian restaurant on Elm Street. She did not ask whether she could come in. She handed me one container, took the other, and sat on the kitchen floor with her back against the cabinets. I joined her because neither of us seemed interested in pretending this was a normal dinner. The box of old photographs was still open beside the couch. At some point, Wanda reached over and pulled out the picture of me in the blue church dress. She looked at the envelope in my hands, then at my face. "You look happy here," she said. I was. "What were you holding?" For a moment I considered giving her a vague answer. Then I realized vagueness was one of the tools my mother had used for years. "An acceptance letter from Appalachian State University," I said. "Full scholarship. Tuition, room, board, everything." Wanda stopped eating. "You never told me that." "I never went." I told her about applying in secret during my junior year of high school, about reading the letter alone in my bedroom until the words blurred, and about carrying it in my backpack for 3 weeks because I was afraid to show Gloria. When I finally placed it on the kitchen table, my mother read every line. She did not forbid me to leave. She did something more effective. She reminded me that Boone was hours away. She said the house would be empty without me. She said it had always been just the two of us, and asked what kind of daughter could leave when her mother needed her. By morning, I had called the university and withdrawn. The woman in admissions had told me I could reapply the following year. I never did. Wanda set the photograph on the floor between us. "Do you think she needed you there?" she asked. "Or do you think she needed to know you would give up anything if she asked the right way?" I looked at the girl in the photograph. She seemed like someone I had failed to protect. "I think I know the answer," I said. That night, I understood the house was only the clearest example of something much older. Gloria had taught me to confuse sacrifice with love, and obedience with loyalty. She had not needed to lock any doors, because she had trained me to stand beside them. The next morning I called her. She answered quickly. "I am not apologizing," I said before she could begin. "I am giving you 6 months to move. I will not charge you back rent. I will help with the move if you accept it. But the lawsuit does not change the deed, and I will not surrender the house." "You are doing this to hurt me," she said. "No, I am doing it because it is true." After I hung up, I found a text from an unfamiliar Memphis number. It read, "Heard about the house. Earl always said you would figure it out. Ray." My father had been absent for 11 years, and I nearly deleted the message. Then Peg called and said Ray had contacted her too. According to him, Earl had left behind one more document, and it could prove Gloria had known the truth from the beginning. Peg asked me to come to her office the next morning. By the time I arrived, Ray was already there, sitting in the chair across from her desk, with both hands clasped between his knees. I had not seen my father in 11 years. He looked older than I remembered, thinner through the face, with more gray at his temples, but the part of him that avoided direct eye contact had not changed. For several seconds, none of us spoke. Then Peg placed a clear evidence sleeve on the desk. Inside was a letter written by Earl, 3 weeks before his death. Ray said Earl had mailed him a copy because he wanted at least one other person in the family to understand what he had done. The letter did not create a new transfer. It referred to the deed by date and recording information, confirming that Birchwood Drive had already been placed in my name. Earl wrote that Gloria could manage the property while I was still underage, but she was not to sell it, borrow against it, or give any interest in it to another person without my written approval. The final paragraph was even more direct. He said he had chosen me because I respected the house, understood work, and would not treat it like something to be traded away when life became inconvenient. Peg slid a second page toward me. It was a copy of a receipt from the law office that had prepared Earl's documents. Gloria's signature appeared at the bottom, acknowledging that she had received the deed information, the temporary management order, and Earl's written instructions. The date was 9 days after his funeral. I stared at her signature until the letters lost their shape. For months, I had tried to leave room for misunderstanding. I had told myself she might have been confused by probate language, overwhelmed by grief, or convinced that living in the house eventually made it hers. The receipt removed that refuge. Gloria had known. She had signed her name beneath the truth, and then built an entire family history around pretending it did not exist. "Why did you keep this?" I asked Ray. He looked down at his hands. "Your grandfather told me to. That is not what I asked." He took a breath. "I left. I thought staying away meant I could not make things worse. You knew she was treating the house like hers." I suspected. "You had the letter." His shoulders lowered. "Yes. I felt no relief at seeing him ashamed. His silence had protected him, not me. You could have called when I turned 18, or 21, or any year after that. I should have, but you did not. He nodded once. Peg allowed the silence to sit before explaining what the documents meant for the case. The deed was already strong enough to establish title. Earl's letter was not important because it gave me ownership. It was important because it directly contradicted Gloria's sworn claim that Earl had orally promised the house to her. The signed receipt showed she had received written notice of his actual intentions. If she continued the lawsuit after seeing this evidence, the court could view her claim as more than weak. It could view it as knowingly unsupported. Peg sent a copy to Gloria's attorney that afternoon, along with a demand that the case be dismissed. She gave them 10 days to respond. During those 10 days, I heard nothing from my mother. Aunt Celeste called once but left no message. Marcus sent a text asking whether I was really willing to take this all the way. I did not answer, because the phrase suggested I had created the distance we were now crossing. On the 9th day, Gloria refused to withdraw. Her attorney filed a response arguing that years of residence and maintenance proved Earl must have intended the house for her, regardless of the recorded deed or written instructions. Peg read the filing twice, then looked at me across her desk. "This is the point where being mistaken becomes a choice," she said. We moved into discovery. Gloria could not name a single person who had heard Earl promise her the house. She produced no notes, no correspondence, and no financial records showing she had purchased any ownership interest. Under questioning, she admitted that she recognized her signature on the receipt, but claimed she had not understood what she was signing. Peg asked whether she had read the documents at the time. Gloria said she could not remember. Then Peg presented a note from Earl's attorney documenting a meeting in which the deed and her limited authority had been explained to her in plain language. Gloria's account began to collapse one answer at a time. The hearing took less than an hour. The judge reviewed the recorded deed, the guardianship order, Earl's letter, the receipt, and the attorney's contemporaneous note. Gloria's claim was dismissed. The judge then considered Peg's sanctions motion. Because Gloria had continued after receiving evidence that directly disproved her allegations, the court ordered her to reimburse $9,400 of my attorney fees. When Peg told me the amount, I did not feel triumphant. I thought about my mother signing that receipt years earlier and deciding that my ignorance was more useful than my consent. Ray waited for me outside the courtroom. He said Earl had always believed I would find the truth because I had his steady hands. "Do not turn his faith in me into an excuse for your silence," I said. He accepted that without argument. Then he left, and I let him. I had won the case, but the judgment did not give me back the years I had spent, asking permission to enter a life that was already mine. The only thing left was to decide what I would do when Gloria's 6 months were over, and the last box finally crossed the threshold of Birchwood Drive. When Gloria's 6 months ended, the court case was already behind us, but the hardest part was still waiting inside the house. She had found a 2-bedroom apartment on the north side of Greensboro, on the first floor of a quiet complex, with a small covered patio facing the parking lot. It was not elegant, but it was clean, manageable, and close to her church. She never told me whether she liked it. She only gave me the moving date and asked whether I was serious about helping. I said yes. I had promised, and I wanted the final boundary between us to be built from something stronger than anger. I arrived at Birchwood Drive early that Saturday morning with boxes, packing tape, old newspapers, and coffee. Gloria was already in the kitchen wrapping dishes. For the first hour, we spoke only when necessary. She told me which plates were fragile. I asked which lamps were going. She pointed out the boxes that belonged in the bedroom and the ones that needed to stay upright. We had never been people who talked easily while working, and that day honesty took the form of not pretending otherwise. Aunt Celeste came for a while, but she left before noon after loading linens and framed photographs into her car. Marcus did not appear. Randall had been gone since the dinner and, as far as I knew, had not returned. I carried boxes through rooms that looked smaller with every piece of furniture removed. Without Gloria's things, the house began to reveal its original lines. The dining room floor showed pale rectangles where cabinets had stood for years. The walls held tiny nail holes and faint outlines around photographs. The back bedroom smelled of dust and cedar after the dresser was taken away. It did not feel like I was erasing my mother. It felt like the house was exhaling after holding one position for too long. Near the end of the afternoon, only 2 boxes remained in the front room. Gloria walked outside and sat on the porch steps. I followed her and lowered myself beside her, leaving enough space between us that neither of us had to pretend we were closer than we were. The oak tree was full and green above us. Heat rested over the neighborhood, softening the distant sounds of lawnmowers and traffic. For several minutes, we watched the moving truck without speaking. Then Gloria said, "Earl always liked you better." Her voice was not bitter exactly. It sounded tired, as though she had carried the sentence for years and finally found a place to set it down. "He trusted me," I said. "There is a difference." She looked at the porch boards beneath our feet. "He built this with his hands." "I know." I kept it standing. "You did take care of it in many ways." She turned toward me, perhaps expecting the acknowledgement to become surrender. It did not. "Taking care of something does not make it yours," I added. Her mouth tightened, but she did not argue. A car passed at the end of the street. Somewhere behind the neighboring houses, a dog barked once and then stopped. Gloria rested her hands on her knees. "Are you going to live here?" "Yes." "You will not sell it?" "I have no plans to." "You will keep the roof repaired?" "Yes." "And the tree?" I looked up at the branches stretching over the yard. "The tree stays." She nodded slowly. It was not an apology, and I no longer needed to turn every quiet moment into the beginning of one. Acceptance was not the same as remorse, but it was more honest than denial. Gloria stood, brushed her palms against her slacks, and went inside for the final boxes. I carried one, she carried the other. We placed them in the truck without ceremony. Before getting into Aunt Celeste's car, Gloria looked back at the house. For 1 second, I saw fear in her face, not fear of homelessness or financial ruin, but fear of becoming separate from the place she had used to define herself. I understood it without accepting responsibility for it. "You have the address," she said. "I do. You should call before coming." The old habit in her voice was almost automatic. Then she caught herself. Her expression shifted. "I mean, call so I know to expect you." "I will." She got into the car. I stood beside the driveway as the truck pulled away, followed by Celeste's sedan. I watched until both vehicles turned at the end of Birchwood Drive and disappeared. The neighborhood became quiet again. I did not raise my arms or smile in victory. I simply turned toward the front door. Inside, the house sounded different. My footsteps moved farther through the empty rooms. I walked slowly from the kitchen to the dining room, down the hallway, and into the back bedroom. I opened windows and let the afternoon air move through. In the living room, I removed Earl's photograph from the floor lamp corner, where Gloria had kept it half hidden. I hung it in the center of the main wall. He stood in front of his workbench, arms at his sides, looking exactly as I remembered him, present without needing anyone's approval. Then I went down to the basement. The workbench had not moved. Most of the tools still hung on their fitted hooks, and the handplane rested where Earl had left it. I lifted it carefully. The wooden handle was smooth from years of use, shaped by a hand larger than mine. I remembered him correcting my stance, instead of taking the tool away. I remembered the clean curl of wood falling onto the floor. "Steady hands," he had said. I sat beside the workbench and allowed the silence to settle around me. For the first time, I was not waiting for someone to tell me I belonged there. I had protected the house, enforced the deed, and watched the last box leave. Yet as I looked at the old tools and the dust in the window light, I understood that reclaiming Birchwood Drive was not the end of the work. There was still another part of my life I had abandoned years before, and upstairs, my phone was waiting. What moved me most about Simone's story was not the deed, the courtroom victory, or even the moment her mother's smile disappeared at the dinner table. It was the quiet realization that a person can spend years asking permission to enter a life that already belongs to them. Simone had every legal right to the house, yet the harder battle was believing she had the right to choose herself. That is why this story is about more than property. It is about boundaries, truth, and the danger of confusing love with obedience. Family loyalty should never require you to surrender your future, ignore dishonesty, or remain silent while someone benefits from your sacrifice. When a serious conflict involves money, inheritance, or property, do not rely only on memories or verbal promises. Keep records, read every document, seek independent legal advice, and understand your rights before confronting anyone. At the same time, do not let justified anger turn into cruelty. Simone protected herself without changing the locks overnight, humiliating her mother further, or demanding impossible repayment. She gave time, followed the law, and kept her dignity. We should not destroy ourselves to preserve peace for people who refuse accountability, but we also should not become the harm we are trying to escape. Sometimes the strongest form of revenge is not punishment. It is clarity. It is building a boundary, walking through the door, and finally living without apologizing for taking up space in your own life.